Welcome into Table Talk. I'm Brian Kell. We are joined on a very special virtual Table Talk. Our virtual table is in effect, and we are pleased to have Tennessee 6th District Congressman John Rose with us on his first time at the table. Congressman Rose, thank you so much for coming on Table Talk this morning.
Brian, it's great to be with you, and thank you for having me on your program today.
Well, we'll get right to it. We want to make sure that we get as much as we can before you've got a busy schedule. But we're taping this on Monday, September 13th, and only 2 days removed from the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and wanted just to kind of get some thoughts from you on that date, and also obviously with the recent troop withdrawals in Afghanistan. All this kind of is coming together. So especially appreciate someone in your role in serving Tennessee as you do to kind of get your thoughts on just everything that's kind of happened over the last week or so.
Sure. Well, it is a milestone for so many of us and for our country. Obviously, the war on terror began 20 years ago on 9/11 when our country was attacked by Al-Qaeda terrorists, and no doubt everyone has their own story of those who were living at the time and how that impacted them and where they were when that happened, and so much sacrifice that day in terms of the people who lost their lives, the families, loved ones of those who were touched by that, and then the huge undertaking to take on an ideology. And we have to remember that our enemy, frankly, is the Islamic extremist ideology that really was the genesis of those attacks on September 11th. And they're attacking us because of who we are and what we believe and the values that we have. And we need to keep that in mind. Different from wars in the past where we have a focused enemy in a particular country or a nation state that we can attack to vanquish the enemy. In this case, we've got to win over time, the hearts and minds. So this is going to go on for a while. It's I think a multi-generational battle that you could say the seeds of were planted long ago, millennia ago, and so we have to keep that in mind as we came up on the anniversary of 9/11, the 20th anniversary. Unfortunately, we did so at the backdrop of the very botched, very failed attempt to retreat from Afghanistan by President Biden and his administration, where we've seen them make basically virtually every mistake I think you could make as they tried to set an artificial timeline for getting us out of Afghanistan. Certainly a 20-year war there in Afghanistan. And if you reflect on that, we accomplished much of our initial purpose within a matter of months, and some might say weeks, of the initial entry into the war with Afghanistan or in Afghanistan. And we succeeded in accomplishing most of the objectives that we had. I recently wrote an op-ed for the Tennessean that appeared in the Tennessean about our engagement on 9/11 and the years that the war on terror that has followed. And what I would say is that I think it was a mistake that over the last 20 years, frankly, we have fought this war in a way that did not require sacrifice from most of us. Certainly, if you served in the military and you saw service in Afghanistan or in the Middle East, you made very real sacrifices, and some gave all. Family members of those who served certainly made sacrifices. But the average person in America, frankly, hasn't been directly impacted by that war. We borrowed the money to fight it. So as taxpayers, we didn't really pay for it. or haven't yet, we've put that burden on our children and grandchildren. I don't think that's the way this country needs to fight wars. I think if we're going to go to war in the future, everyone needs to have participation in that. And I think it will lead to better decision making by this country. That said, we were there. And, the previous president, President Trump, had successfully managed the conflict there to where we had not seen significant casualties in quite some time. And with a fairly small presence on the ground in Afghanistan, he made the decision that we wanted to withdraw ultimately, but it was a conditions-based withdrawal, and with timelines and milestones and goals that had to be met and commitments by the other side in terms of the behavior that we were going to see out of them. Unfortunately, President Biden decided to just set a time certain to kind of declare victory and get out by the 20th anniversary, and he did that. But we see the carnage that resulted in, the loss of additional service members, the necessity to send several thousand U.S. service members back into harm's way, and kind of a clumsy effort to get Americans out. We should expect better from our armed services. We should expect better from our leaders in terms of how that was conducted. And in this case, that's on the president. That's on the 46th president, because it was his policy and his decision to do that in the way that it was done. And he has that to answer for. The cost to this country in terms of lost lives, lost treasure, lost confidence in American leadership, I think we'll be paying the price for years to come.
Well, it's something we're definitely not going to hear the last word on this, and it'll be something that all of us will be following over the safe to say the weeks, months, and even possibly years to come on that one. Again, we're talking with U.S. Congressman from Tennessee 6th District, John Rose. Congressman Rose, you're kind of in a unique position in that you're the owner and president of Boson Software, which trains IT professionals across the country, and you're also a member of the House Rural Broadband Caucus. So with this perspective that you've got, especially going through the pandemic that we've gone through, and the need for high quality broadband, kind of speak to us as to what you're hearing when it comes down to broadband in Tennessee or broadband in the country.
Well, certainly, I think we all have had a real education over the last 18 months as the pandemic, as COVID-19 unfolded, of how critically important, if we didn't know so already, how critically important access to cutting edge high-speed broadband is for just frankly succeeding in the 21st century, both in terms of business, but also just interacting with your fellow man, and for students learning, and if you need healthcare, for accessing our healthcare system. So lots of illustrations of why broadband is important. And I think it also underscores that we need to make sure that broadband is widely available, and that we view it as a critical service, just like we do telephone service, just like we do electric service and our other basic utilities. So I favor an approach that would address this on a continual, ongoing basis. Unfortunately, I think what we've seen, and we're grateful for the extraordinary funding that has come to our broadband providers to encourage them to go out and extend availability of broadband. But I think it has been kind of a patchwork of one-off solutions, grant funding, extraordinary appropriations to try to get us up to the current standard. What I think we all know is this is not a one and done proposition. We need to put in place policies and systems that will support maintaining cutting edge broadband availability and access all across the country on an ongoing basis into the future, so that as will inevitably happen, the technology evolves, that our providers like Ben Lomond have the resources that they need, particularly providers like Ben Lomond and so many other providers, rural telephone cooperatives like Ben Lomond, that serve high cost service areas where oftentimes your customers are far apart and it's expensive to get that service to them. We need to make sure you have the resources on a continual basis. And so I favor an approach more like the Universal Service Fund that has been very successful over the last 70 or so years, 70, 80 years, in bringing telephone service to rural communities And I'd like to see us alter the way that fund works and use and leverage that model to make sure that broadband is available going forward to everyone all across the country. Broadband is very much like telephone service, very much like mail service. It's good for everyone if the broadest possible cross section of the population has access to it.
Well, thank you for your work on that and in the position that you hold on the House Rural Broadband Caucus. You talked about how the pandemic has highlighted the important need for broadband. I know that you introduced a bill recently to encourage transparency about the origins of COVID-19. Can you speak to that bill? And also your hopes of what that yields, I guess, especially in relation to China's cooperation or lack thereof.
Sure. So I did introduce a bill entitled Unmasking the Origins of COVID-19. And essentially what the bill does is it calls on the U.S. State Department to create a reward, very much like the reward that was given for information leading to the location of Osama bin Laden, and we all remember that was a multi-year process. I don't think anyone can avoid the reality that COVID-19 has been one of the most dramatic incidents in world history, and the impact on not only Tennesseans, the 6th District, but Americans and people all around the world has been very dramatic. We deserve to know, we deserve to have answers about the origins of that virus. And unfortunately, the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government have stood in the way of that and obscured those origins. And I think they need to be held to account. It's not clear exactly what the truth is about the origins of COVID, and we've heard lots of speculation. Unfortunately, some in our own government have worked at cross purposes in terms of getting to the bottom of that, and it inspires suspicion and distrust for our government. So I think for a whole variety of reasons, we want to get to the bottom of that. So the program that I'm proposing would empower the State Department to put in place a reward under an existing program that has been in place for a number of years and has led to similar pieces of information or brought people to justice in the past. And frankly, it should be a bipartisan effort and should be supported in a bipartisan way. I don't think there's anyone who could deny that it would be useful to know about the origins, and we should demand the cooperation of the Chinese in this matter. And frankly, if it comes to light that there was any nefarious activity here, there's a lot of suspicion about that and a lot of debate about it. And it's absolutely clear that the Chinese have worked to suppress the truth and to keep it hidden and to keep their role in it hidden. At the very least, we know that they knew about this virus long before they reported it to the rest of the world. And those were critical days, critical weeks, maybe critical months when the world could have been marshaling the resources to combat this virus. And certainly it could have probably been better contained if the Chinese government had been truthful and forthright with the rest of the world. And the fact that they continue to hide those facts is unacceptable. So we've got to get to the bottom of that and hold them to account ultimately.
Well, you mentioned a word in breaking down your hopes and expectations for that bill, and that word was bipartisan. It seems as if, whether you're watching television or on social media or the internet over the past few years or probably longer, that seems to be a four-letter word in today's in the heartbeat of the country. But can you speak to that apparent divide and even any kind of efforts to come together on issues in a bipartisan way?
Sure. So I think the first thing that I would share with the listeners to this program is that there's a great deal more that is done on a bipartisan basis in Congress than meets the eye. So the vast majority of the bills that pass through the Congress pass on a bipartisan basis. In fact, many of them pass almost on a unanimous basis in many cases. And so we need to keep that in mind, that the media, social media, have a tendency to focus on the places where there's division, where there's discord. And so you have to keep that in mind. However, I would tell you that there are significant partisan divides in Washington, and certainly we see those reported in stark terms. And that's unfortunate. We should work together. There are lots of things that can be said about that. I think as we look at the current makeup of the U.S. Congress, if you think about that in a kind of global perspective, in the House of Representatives, the Democrats right now have a four-member majority. The United States Senate is equally divided, 50-50. It can't get closer than that. And then, by any estimation, the 2020 presidential election was a very close election by historic standards, particularly if you look at the number of votes separating the two candidates, on a precinct by precinct basis, state by state basis. It would have only taken 100,000 votes or so to flip the election the other way. And so, the country is pretty evenly divided. We happen to live in an area of the country, the 6th District, the service area of Ben Lomond is very conservative by national standards. And so, my job is to represent the views and interests of the people of the 6th District, to represent Tennessee values. And I like to say, take Tennessee values to Washington, hopefully get Washington out of Tennessee. Those values are more conservative. So my job is to fight for the views of my voters, to fight strenuously and zealously to see that their views are heard. But at the end of the day, I think we all have to be cognizant of the fact that there are people in other parts of the country that feel strongly otherwise. And so, we should be looking for ways to come together. Unfortunately, I would tell you, I think the rules of Congress, the rules of the House of Representatives, do not foster that kind of bipartisanship or that coming together or compromise. We don't debate bills on the floor of the House of Representatives. We give speeches about bills on the House of Representatives floor. And I think the people would be better served if we change those rules in such a way that all voices could be heard. Sometimes that would be very tedious. Debates would go on for a long time. And I know for some listeners, you probably think that's true. But far too often, what happens with very consequential legislation is that there may only be an hour for real speeches to be given on the House floor. And there's really no debate. Each side comes up, says what they're thinking, and there's, the most of the House members are not on the floor when that's happening. And so there's not the kind of persuasion or opening of eyes or sharing of thoughts that you would hope for, and that I think most people probably expect and think that is the way Congress works. It's the way our General Assembly here in Tennessee works, and I think they do a pretty good job, frankly, and all sides get to be heard. That doesn't happen in Congress, and so we've got to work toward that, in my opinion. I'm a strong conservative and feel like we need to take the country in the direction that our state has gone. It's hard to argue with the results that we have at the state level, and by comparison to what's happening at the national level, where we frankly mortgaged our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren's futures. As someone said the other day, we probably should all be required to write a thank you note to our great-grandchildren, thanking them for the standard of living that they're providing to us at their expense.
Well, speaking of voices, I know that you've got a farmer's voice as well, and that agriculture is in your DNA as a farmer, former state commissioner of agriculture. What are you hearing and seeing in that sector and the government's role in farming?
Well, so I am a farmer, proud heritage. I am the custodian of an 8th generation farm that's located over in the DeKalb, Smith County area, along the county line there between DeKalb and Smith, in a little community called Lancaster, actually kind of between two communities, Lancaster and Temperance Hall, for your listeners who may know that area, just below Center Hill Dam. And been in the family since 1790. And my dad was a farmer, and that was his passion, and he passed that on to me at a very young age. And so that's something that I have a great interest in. I have 2 young sons. They're going to be the 9th generation, we hope, just to I tell everyone not much pressure on them, just a 231-year legacy that we hope they continue. And it's pretty remarkable that that the family has been able to pass that farm generation to generation. It's changed names a few times when the daughters would be the ones that carried on the tradition. And so that's something that's very near and dear to my heart. Agriculture is, in many ways, I think, one of the most freely competitive marketplaces in our economy, and certainly farmers are very independent souls that want to make it on their own and take on nature and all the other challenges that they face to feed their families and be successful as farmers and feed the world. So it's something that is very important to me. I was a Future Farmer of America, an FFA member in high school, and it's still something very important to me. When I think about Washington, we have to probably, as it relates to agriculture, we have to turn all the way back to the early part of the last century when, really an outgrowth of the Great Depression, the federal government got very involved in agriculture with a variety of programs that were really aimed not at supporting farmers so much as ensuring that there is a safe, plentiful supply of food. And the government's intervention in agriculture to make sure that's true, that there's always this abundant supply of food that's cheap and safe, that tinkering with the marketplace creates problems for farmers. And so a lot of people, criticize farmers for all the federal programs that exist and the payments that they sometimes receive. But we have to keep in mind that if it were not for those programs, then we would see probably wider price swings for agricultural commodities, for food products, and that would be disconcerting to consumers if you go in and you find milk is a couple dollars a gallon one day and the next day it's $10 a gallon. That's not welcome news for consumers. And so I understand why we've done this, and it's hard to argue that it's not necessarily a good thing. It's at some level, but it does create problems for agriculture. And so one of the big challenges for me as a member of Congress and for Congress is trying to then navigate how do you evolve those federal programs over time, make them responsive to the marketplace in such a way that doesn't put farmers at a disadvantage and yet achieves the policy goals that the federal government has adopted for many decades now of trying to keep our food supply abundant. And we live in remarkable times. I mean, this country, I would tell you, we live in the greatest country in the history of the world. And one of the reasons that it's one of the greatest countries in the history of the world is because we have the most abundant, safest supply of food of any civilization in the history of the world. This country has long been not only self-sufficient, but able to feed much of the rest of the world. And we're very blessed to have that system undergirded by our system of private property rights and our free enterprise system and the freedoms and liberties that we all enjoy. And having food independence is one of the important hallmarks of that.
Well, and I guess piggybacking off of that, farming, agriculture, just overall economic strength. Tennessee gets mentioned a lot as in a lot of ways, a national leader when it comes down to positioning itself economically, even logistically, throughout this nation to business growth. Speak as to what you are hearing as to Tennessee on a national level and its strength.
Well, I think the last 18 months have really underscored and illustrated the power of federalism. The founding fathers gave us this system of federalism that has served the country well, something that I don't think most Americans stop and think about most of the time or fully appreciate. The founding fathers distrusted big government. They wanted to maintain the sovereignty and power of the states to be essentially laboratories for not only democracy, which we often hear said, but also laboratories for what would work in terms of how we go about governing ourselves. And so the last 18 months, I would tell you, I think Tennessee's leaders more often than not have gotten it right. They're not perfect. They've probably made some mistakes, But what they've done, I think, has put Tennessee in an excellent position. There's a reason why people are flocking to our state. There is a reason why businesses are moving to our state. Headquarters of businesses moving to our state, bringing their people with them in many cases, is because they've seen what's happening in Tennessee. They've seen the business-friendly climate, the appreciation for low taxes and maintaining fiscal responsibility that our state has demonstrated over many decades, frankly. And they like that, and that's what's bringing people to our state. And so to measure that, we have one of the lowest tax rates in the nation. We have among the lowest debt of any state in the country. And maybe most importantly, in terms of illustrating that, over the last 18 months during the COVID pandemic, Tennessee is one of only 7 states that saw real economic growth during this last year, which is a remarkable achievement. And we're one of only 6 states that actually where our state government actually produced a surplus over that same period of time. And so my hat goes off to our state legislators for the leadership that they're providing. And I would point them out, but I'll probably leave somebody out. So I'll just say we have a well-managed state, and I think it's a real testament to why Washington needs to do less and let the states do more. If there are states that want to go down a perilous path of mortgaging their future, then that would be something they can decide. But then Tennesseans can make another decision. And I think we see, we can see in very stark terms the difference between those 2 sets of policies. And frankly, the federal government was never intended to do all the things that it's doing. As a result of that, the things that it's supposed to be doing, like providing for our national defense and controlling our borders and dealing with national issues, it's not doing very well, I would tell you, and certainly has mortgaged our future in terms of the national debt that now is approaching $30 trillion. By contrast, Tennessee has almost no debt and very low tax rates. And so I think the news is bright for Tennessee, and I think it's a real testament to the way that our government and our country should be run.
You talked about Tennessee economically, dealing with the pandemic over the last, getting, I guess, about a year and a half. It's kind of been almost throughout your entire term that this has been going on. Speak to what you as a dad, a husband, a Tennessean in general, what you've learned about yourself, what you've learned about this sixth district through this pandemic, what you're hearing, what you've seen.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. And certainly I have learned a lot about the way our Congress operates, but reflecting on the people of the 6th district, I'm more convinced than ever that the bedrock values that we have here in Tennessee, I think provide the hope and the answer. We as a group are a faithful people. We have faith in our Creator. And maintain our trust in our Creator and God, and that drives our lives in many ways. I've already spoken much about how we manage our affairs here in Tennessee, so I've learned a lot about that. And but we're also a giving people, and we want to see our fellow man taken care of, and we do that. Frankly, I think in Tennessee, we still do that better than much of the rest of the country, where we have volunteer organizations, nonprofit organizations, frankly, where we individually step up. And I think that's the way it should be. I think we see time and again that those approaches to dealing with the challenges that our fellow man faces work out far better than when we try to outsource charity to the federal government. And so seeing those stories across the 6th district is very uplifting. One of the things that I would say I've also learned through the process of running for Congress and now serving in Congress is that there's no question in my mind but what we live in the greatest country in the history of the world. And you see that in terms of the opportunity that people, Americans and Tennesseans in particular, sees. Anybody who thinks that they're somehow limited and they can't succeed They just need to hear the stories of their fellow Americans and know that, far too often what we see is that people come here from other places. They immigrate to our country, and within their lifetimes, they go from being destitute to being phenomenally successful. So if someone new can come to this country and do that, then every American born in this country has a jump start on those folks. We can all be successful. So if you're wallowing in self-pity, thinking that somehow you've been mistreated and that you've been held back and that you can't succeed, that's on you and not on this country. And anybody who tries to argue with that, I think, is just missing the point that there's a reason why people flock to this country, and it's because they see the opportunity here and the opportunity for success. One of the things I've learned about me is just the inspiring stories of my fellow Tennesseans and how it inspires me. Family is important to me. Just behind my faith comes my family, and that's true for so many Tennesseans. And obviously, I talked about the great legacy of my family being an 8th generation Tennessean and having that wonderful legacy to build on. That's true for so many Tennesseans as well. And it's been a source of great pride for me, but also a source of great inspiration and reflecting on the journey that my forebears took when they came across the Appalachian Mountains from North Carolina and Virginia and settled here in Tennessee. They left a secure, productive, safe, and prosperous life to strike out into the frontier. And wow, if we could just continue to have that level of entrepreneurship and motivation to make things better, I think the country would be headed, the future of the country would be in very good hands.
Well, thank you for your time. And hopefully we've given some folks that may think that there's not much, that there's more bipartisanship that should happen, because anytime an MTSU guy and a tech guy can get together and have a conversation, I think that gives new hope to bipartisanship.
Well, that's true. I used to have a lengthy repertoire of Middle Tennessee State University jokes that I'll spare everyone with those today as a Tennessee Tech alum, and just say wings up and go Tech. And of course, MTSU has had a very good run here for the last 25, 30 years as it's just exploded and grown so dramatically. And two great institutions of higher learning in our state, and we should be very proud of them and work to support them at every turn. I do want to say it's a great privilege and honor to represent people of the 6th District of Tennessee, and I appreciate that. And I understand every day that my job is to try to understand what people here in the 6th District want to see happen with their federal government and with their country, and to represent and be true to those values. And so thank you for the honor to those listening. Thank you for the honor of representing you in the Congress. And I pledge to you that I'll work hard every day to make sure that your voices are heard.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And since you gave me a wings up, I'll give you a true blue. And hopefully we'll have you back here on Table Talk, maybe even in person, and do it in the studio next time. But thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for your service. Also, your behind the scenes crew and your staff and the job that they do. Thank you so much for continuing to represent this area, and best of luck.
Thank you.